She thought hiding across the ocean would save her. It didn't. Stephanie Moretti spent nearly a decade in Switzerland running from her father's empire, until one phone call destroyed everything. Her hand had already been sold in marriage to a mafia heir she'd never met. So she vanished into Barcelona under a fake name, terrified and desperate. Then she met a stranger with dark green eyes who saved her life twice before she knew his name. She fell hard. She fell fast. She never imagined the man she was falling in love with was the exact man waiting for her at the altar. This is a story about betrayal, survival, and the thin line between captivity and choice. Stay until the end. Hit like. Comment your city so I can see how far this story travels. Let's begin. The plane touched down in Barcelona on a Tuesday afternoon, and Stephanie Moretti stepped onto Spanish concrete with nothing but a forged passport, 8,000 euros in cash, and the kind of fear that lived in her chest like a second heartbeat. She kept her sunglasses on even inside the terminal, kept her head down, moved fast through customs like someone who knew exactly how much time she didn't have. The passport said her name was Elena Rossi, 28 years old, marketing consultant, Italian citizenship, clean record, normal life. None of it was true. Her real name was Stephanie Moretti, and normal hadn't existed for her since the day she was born into one of New York's most powerful crime families. For nearly 10 years, she had built a quiet life in Zurich, working at a tech firm, renting a small apartment near the lake, pretending she was just another expat who'd left home for better weather and better coffee. She had almost convinced herself it was real. Then her father called. She still remembered the way his voice sounded through the phone 3 weeks ago. Calm, matter of fact, like he was discussing dinner plans instead of destroying her entire existence. "You're getting married in 6 weeks," he'd said. No preamble, no apology. "Leonardo Valenti. Good family, strong alliance. The wedding's already arranged." Stephanie had felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. "I don't even know him." "You will. I'm not coming back to New York." Her father's laugh was short and cold. "You don't have a choice, sweetheart. This was decided a long time ago." She'd hung up on him, packed a single suitcase that same night, withdrew every cent from her accounts before anyone could freeze them, and disappeared. Now she was here. Barcelona stretched out in front of her like a city built for people who needed to vanish. Crowded streets, endless alleys, a coastline that swallowed secrets whole. She checked into a cheap hostel in El Raval under her fake name, paid cash for 2 weeks up front, and locked herself in a room barely big enough for the bed. Then she sat on the edge of the mattress and tried not to think about what would happen when they found her. Because they would find her. Men like her father always did. The first week passed in a haze of paranoia and sleepless nights. Stephanie kept her phone off, avoided cameras, changed her route every time she left the hostel. She dyed her hair darker, cut it shorter, bought clothes that made her look like every other backpacker drifting through the Gothic Quarter. She told herself she was being careful. Really, she was terrified. On the 8th day, she made a mistake. She went to a nightclub in Gracia called La Sombra, a basement venue packed with bodies, strobe lights, and bass so loud it rattled her ribs. She thought the crowd would make her invisible, thought she could lose herself in the noise for a few hours and stop feeling like prey. She was wrong. The man appeared out of nowhere halfway through the night, tall, mid-30s. Expensive suit that didn't belong in a place like this. He cornered her near the bar with the kind of smile that made her stomach twist. "Stephanie Moretti," he said, leaning close enough that she could smell the whiskey on his breath. "Your father's been looking for you." Her blood went cold. She tried to back away, but he grabbed her wrist, hard enough to bruise. "Let go," she said, her voice barely audible over the music. He didn't. "You're coming with me." "Like hell I am." She twisted, yanked, tried to pull free, but his grip tightened. People danced around them like nothing was happening, like women didn't get dragged out of clubs every single night. Then someone else moved. A hand landed on the man's shoulder, firm, controlled, impossibly calm. She said, "Let go." The voice was low, American, dangerously quiet. The man in the suit turned, irritation flashing across his face, and Stephanie finally saw the stranger who just stepped between them. He was tall, taller than the man holding her wrist. Dark hair, sharp jawline, eyes so green they looked almost unreal under the club lights. He wore a black shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, and there was something about the way he stood. Still, centered, like a man who'd never had to raise his voice to make someone listen. "This doesn't concern you," the suit said. The stranger's expression didn't change. "Let her go and we won't have a problem. She's coming with me." "No," the stranger said softly. "She's not." The air shifted. Stephanie didn't see the stranger move, didn't see his hand reach out or his weight shift forward. 1 second, the man in the suit was holding her wrist. The next, he was on the floor with his arm twisted behind his back and the stranger's knee pressed against his spine. It happened so fast the music didn't even skip. "You're going to walk out of here," the stranger said, his voice still calm, still terrifyingly controlled. "And you're going to forget you ever saw her. Understand?" The man on the floor groaned something that might have been agreement. The stranger released him, stepped back, and the man scrambled to his feet and disappeared into the crowd without looking back. Then the stranger turned to Stephanie. "You okay?" She was shaking. She realized it suddenly. The way her hands trembled, the way her breath came too fast, the way her wrist still burned where the other man had grabbed her. "I'm fine," she lied. "You're not." He was right, she wasn't. "Come on," he said, gesturing toward the exit. "Let's get you out of here." She should have said no, should have run in the opposite direction, should have known better than to trust a stranger who moved like violence was a language he spoke fluently. But something in his eyes stopped her. Not kindness, exactly. Something steadier, something that felt almost like safety. So she followed him. Outside, the night air hit her like cold water. The street was quieter here, just the distant hum of traffic and the faint echo of music spilling from nearby bars. The stranger didn't say anything, just walked beside her, hands in his pockets, like he had all the time in the world. Finally, Stephanie broke the silence. "Who are you?" "Someone who doesn't like watching women get grabbed in clubs." "That's not an answer." He glanced at her, and for the first time she saw something close to amusement flicker across his face. "Call me Reuben." "Is that your real name?" "Does it matter?" "Probably not." They walked for another block before he spoke again. "You should be more careful," he said. "Barcelona's not as safe as people think." "I can take care of myself." "Clearly." She shot him a look, but he wasn't smiling, wasn't mocking her, just stating facts. "Where are you staying?" he asked. "Nearby." "Where nearby?" "None of your business." This time he did smile, just barely, just enough to soften the sharp edges of his face. "Fair enough." They stopped at a corner near Las Ramblas. Stephanie turned to face him, suddenly aware of how close they were standing. "Thank you," she said, "for back there." "Don't thank me yet." "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means the guy who grabbed you didn't look like some random drunk. He knew your name. That's not a coincidence." Stephanie's chest tightened. "I don't know what you're talking about." Reuben studied her for a long moment, like he could see straight through every lie she'd ever told. "Yes," he said quietly. "You do." Then he stepped back, hands still in his pockets, and nodded toward the street behind her. "Get home safe, Stefani." He turned and walked away before she could respond, and she stood there on the corner, heart pounding, wondering how the hell he knew her real name. She didn't see him again for 3 days. In that time, Stephanie moved hostels twice, changed her hair again, and stopped sleeping more than 2 hours at a time. The man from the club haunted every thought. Not Reuben, but the other one. The one who'd called her by name. Her father's reach was longer than she'd thought. On the 4th day, she went to the beach. It was stupid, reckless. The kind of thing someone running for their life shouldn't do. But she needed air that didn't taste like fear. Needed to feel the sun on her skin and remember what it was like to exist without constantly looking over her shoulder. She found a quiet spot near Barceloneta, spread out a towel, and lay down with her eyes closed. For 20 minutes, she almost felt normal. Then she went into the water. The Mediterranean was colder than it looked, sharp and bracing and alive. Stephanie swam out past the breakers, letting the current pull her farther from shore, and for the first time in weeks her mind went quiet. She didn't notice the riptide until it was too late. 1 second she was floating. The next, she was being dragged sideways, arms flailing, lungs burning as water filled her mouth. She tried to swim parallel to the shore, tried to remember everything she'd ever been taught about surviving currents. But the ocean was stronger. Panic hit hard and fast. She was going to drown. Then someone grabbed her. An arm locked around her chest from behind, pulling her up, pulling her back toward the surface. She gasped, coughing, choking on salt water in fear. "Stop fighting," a voice said in her ear. Calm, steady, familiar. Reuben. He swam them both back toward shore with powerful, controlled strokes, one arm still wrapped around her waist. When they finally reached the shallows, he let her go, and Stephanie collapsed onto the wet sand, coughing up seawater and trying to breathe. Reuben crouched beside her, water dripping from his hair, his shirt plastered to his chest. "You good?" She nodded, even though she wasn't. "What the hell were you thinking?" he asked, and for the first time there was something sharp in his voice. "You don't swim that far out unless you know the current." "I know," she managed between coughs. "I wasn't thinking, clearly." They sat there in silence while her breathing slowed and the world stopped spinning. Finally, Stephanie looked up at him. "You were following me." It wasn't a question. Reuben didn't deny it. "Why?" "Because you're in trouble," he said simply, "and you're trying to handle it alone." "That's not your problem." "Maybe not." "So why do you care?" He looked at her, really looked at her, and something shifted in his expression, something she couldn't quite name. "I don't know yet," he said. It was the most honest thing anyone had said to her in weeks. Stephanie should have walked away. Should have told him to stop following her, stop asking questions, stop looking at her like she was something worth saving. But she didn't. Instead, she let him drive her back to her hostel in a car that was too expensive for someone who claimed to be just passing through Barcelona. Let him buy her coffee at a corner cafe while she dried off. Let him sit across from her in silence until the shaking in her hands finally stopped. And when he asked if he could see her again, she said yes. That was the beginning of everything. Over the next 2 weeks, Reuben became the only steady thing in Stephanie's unraveling life. He met her for breakfast at beachside cafes, where they ate pan con tomate and drank cortados while the morning sun turned the water gold. Walked with her through Park Güell and the Gothic Quarter, pointing out details she'd never noticed. Hidden courtyards, centuries-old graffiti, streets that looked different depending on the angle of the light. He didn't ask about her past, didn't push when she deflected his questions, just existed beside her like he had nowhere else to be. And slowly, so slowly, she didn't notice it happening, Stephanie started to let her guard down. She told him about Switzerland, about the tech job she'd loved and the apartment by the lake and the quiet, anonymous life she'd built for herself. She told him about her mother, the way she'd died when Stephanie was 12, the way her father had never been the same after. She didn't tell him about the empire, about the blood money, and the violence, and the marriage contract waiting for her back in New York. But Reuben seemed to understand the shape of her silence. "You're running from something," he said one night as they sat on the terrace of his rented villa overlooking the city. "Or someone." Stephanie looked down at her wine glass. "Does it matter?" "Maybe." "Why?" "Because I want to know if you're ever going to stop." The question landed like a punch. She'd spent her entire life running, from her father's expectations, from the violence that soaked every corner of their world, from the future that had been carved out for her before she was old enough to have a say. But sitting here with Reuben, watching the lights of Barcelona flicker below them like fallen stars, she realized something terrifying. She didn't want to run anymore, at least not from him. "I don't know," she admitted. Reuben reached across the table and took her hand. His grip was warm, solid, real. "Then stay," he said quietly. "At least for tonight." She did. That night, Stephanie slept in Reuben's villa for the first time, in a guest room with wide windows and soft sheets and the distant sound of the ocean below. She slept deeper than she had in months. And when she woke up to sunlight streaming through the curtains and the smell of coffee drifting from the kitchen, she let herself believe just for a moment, that maybe she could have this. Maybe she could have him. The days blurred together after that. Reuben took her sailing along the coast in a boat he claimed to have borrowed from a friend. They spent long afternoons exploring Montjuic, eating seafood at outdoor markets, getting lost in neighborhoods where the streets had no names. He kissed her for the first time on a rooftop in Elborn, with the city spread out beneath them and the taste of wine still on both their lips. It wasn't gentle. It was hungry and desperate and terrifyingly honest. The kind of kiss that felt like falling off a cliff with no idea where the bottom was. When they finally pulled apart, Stephanie was shaking again. Not from fear this time, from want. "Tell me to stop," Reuben said, his forehead pressed against hers, his voice rough. "No, Stephanie, don't stop." So he didn't. They spent the night tangled together in his bed, learning the shape of each other in the dark. Hands and mouths and breathless confessions that felt too raw to survive daylight. Afterwards, lying in the quiet with his arm around her waist and her head on his chest, Stephanie whispered the truth she'd been carrying alone for weeks. "I'm supposed to get married." Reuben went still. "To someone you love?" "To someone I've never met." Silence. "Does he know where you are?" "My father does, and he won't stop looking." Reuben's hand moved slowly up and down her spine, soothing, steady, like he was trying to calm something inside her that had been broken for too long. "Then we'll figure it out," he said. "How?" "I don't know yet, but we will." It was a promise he had no business making, and Stephanie believed him anyway. The next morning, everything changed. Reuben woke her early with coffee and a croissant and an easy smile that made her stomach flip. "Get dressed," he said. "I want to show you something." She didn't ask what, just pulled on jeans and a sweater and followed him down to the car. They drove through the city as the sun climbed higher, past the harbor and the old fortifications, winding up into the hills where the houses grew bigger and the streets grew quieter. Stephanie assumed they were going to breakfast somewhere with a view. She was wrong. Reuben pulled into a private airstrip on the outskirts of the city where a sleek jet sat waiting on the tarmac. Stephanie's heart stopped. "What is this?" Reuben turned off the engine, his expression unreadable. "We need to talk." "About what?" He didn't answer, just got out of the car and walked toward the plane. Stephanie sat frozen in the passenger seat, her mind racing, her pulse hammering in her ears. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but her legs wouldn't move. Finally, she forced herself out of the car and followed him. Reuben was waiting at the bottom of the jet stairs, hands in his pockets, looking every bit the man she'd fallen in love with, except for the way his eyes had gone distant, guarded. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice shaking. "New York." The word hit her like a fist. "No." "Stephanie, but no. I'm not going back there." "You don't have a choice." "Yes, I do. I ran. I got away. I... "You never got away," Reuben said quietly. "You were always going to end up here." She stared at him, the world tilting beneath her feet. "What are you talking about?" He stepped closer, and for the first time since she'd met him, Stephanie saw something in his face that looked almost like regret. "My name isn't Reuben," he said. "It's Leonardo. Leonardo Valenti." The name slammed into her like a freight train. Valenti. The family her father had arranged her marriage with. The heir she was supposed to marry. "No. You're lying." "I'm not." "This is a mistake. I'm the man your father promised you to," Leonardo said, and his voice was so calm it made her want to scream. "I've known who you were since the moment I saw you in that club. I've known where you were this whole time, and I've been waiting for you to trust me enough to stop running." Stephanie couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but stand there while the man she loved, the man she'd given everything to, destroyed her all over again. "You lied to me." "Yes." "You've been lying this entire time." "Yes." "Why?" Leonardo's jaw tightened. "Because if I'd told you the truth, you would have run. And I needed you to see that I'm not the monster you think I am. You kidnapped me. I saved you twice. And now you're dragging me back to the one place I swore I'd never go." Yes. She wanted to hit him, wanted to scream, wanted to claw her way out of this nightmare and wake up somewhere safe. But there was nowhere safe left. Not anymore. Leonardo reached for her hand and she jerked back like he'd burned her. "Don't touch me. Stephanie, don't." He stepped back and for just a second, she saw something crack in his carefully controlled expression. Pain. Real, raw, unguarded pain. "Get on the plane," he said quietly. "Please." "And if I don't? Then I'll carry you." It wasn't a threat. It was a fact. Stephanie looked at the jet, at the city behind her, at the man she'd fallen in love with, who'd just revealed himself to be the prison she'd been running from all along. She had no more moves left, no more escapes. So she walked up the stairs, climbed into the jet, and sat down in a leather seat that cost more than most people made in a year. Leonardo followed her inside. The doors sealed shut, and as the plane lifted off the ground, Barcelona disappeared beneath the clouds, taking the last piece of her freedom with it. The jet leveled out somewhere over the Atlantic, and Stephanie hadn't said a word in 3 hours. She sat across from Leonardo in the cabin's cream leather seating, staring out the window at nothing but clouds and sky. Her jaw was locked tight. Her hands gripped the armrests like she was holding herself in place through sheer force of will. Leonardo watched her from his seat, a glass of whiskey untouched on the table between them. He'd known this moment was coming, had planned for it, prepared for it, played out a dozen different versions in his head during the weeks he'd spent in Barcelona pretending to be someone else. None of those versions had prepared him for the look on her face when she'd realized who he was, like he'd killed something inside her. "You should eat something," he said finally. Stephanie didn't move, didn't even blink. "Stephanie, don't say my name." Her voice was flat, empty, worse than anger. Leonardo leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "We're going to have to talk eventually." "No, we don't." "Yes, we do." "Why?" She turned to look at him then, and her eyes were red-rimmed but dry. No tears, just fury barely held in check. "So you can explain why you spent 2 weeks lying to my face? So you can tell me it was all part of some grand plan to make me fall in love with my own cage?" "It wasn't like that." "Then what was it like, Leonardo?" The way she said his real name, sharp, cutting, like a weapon, made something twist in his chest. "It was supposed to give you a choice," he said quietly. Stephanie laughed, and it was the ugliest sound he'd ever heard come out of her mouth. A choice. Right. Because kidnapping someone and flying them across the ocean against their will is all about choice. "I didn't kidnap you." "What do you call this?" "Keeping you alive." That shut her up. Leonardo exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. "Your father sent 3 different crews to Barcelona looking for you," he said. "The guy in the club was just the first. If I hadn't been there, they would have dragged you onto a plane in handcuffs. At least this way, you're not in a fucking cargo hold." "How noble of you." "I'm not asking you to thank me." "Good. Because I won't." Silence dropped between them like a blade. Leonardo picked up his whiskey, drained it in one swallow, and set the glass down harder than he meant to. "I know you're angry," he said. "Angry doesn't even begin to cover it." "I know. Do you?" Stephanie leaned forward, and there was something dangerous in her eyes now, something that looked a lot like hate. "Do you have any idea what it feels like to finally let your guard down with someone, to trust them, to believe them when they say they want to help, only to find out every single second of it was a lie?" "It wasn't all a lie." "Which part was real then? The part where you saved me in the club? The part where you pulled me out of the ocean? Or was it the part where you fucked me and let me think I actually mattered to you?" Leonardo's hands curled into fists. "You do matter to me. Stop. Stephanie, stop talking." She stood abruptly, pacing to the other end of the cabin like she couldn't stand being near him for another second. Leonardo stayed in his seat, watching her move, all restless energy and barely controlled rage. "You want to know what the worst part is?" she said, her back still to him. "It's not that you lied. It's that I actually believed you. I believed you when you said we'd figure it out. I believed you when you looked at me like I was something worth protecting. And now I have to live with the fact that I'm the idiot who fell in love with a man who never existed." The words hit him harder than any punch ever had. Because she was right. Ruben didn't exist. Had never existed. He was just a mask Leonardo had worn to get close to her. A softer version of himself, stripped of the violence and the legacy and the weight of the name Valenti. But the way he felt about her? That was real. Every second of it. "I didn't lie about everything," he said. Stephanie turned, arms crossed over her chest. Prove it. I meant it when I said I wanted you to stop running. Because you wanted me trapped. Because I wanted you safe. Same thing. No, Leonardo said, standing now. It's not. He crossed the cabin slowly, stopping a few feet away from her, close enough to see the way her breath hitched, far enough that she didn't bolt. Your father's world is a meat grinder, he said. You know that better than anyone. You ran because you didn't want to be another piece of property traded between families like livestock. And I don't blame you for that. But running doesn't make you safe, it just makes you a target. So your solution is to drag me back into the exact world I was trying to escape. My solution is to give you protection. By forcing me to marry you. By making sure no one else can touch you. Stephanie stared at him like he'd lost his mind. You really believe that's what this is? Protection? Yes. Then you're more delusional than I thought. Leonardo's jaw tightened. You think I wanted this? He said, and there was an edge in his voice now. You think I wanted to spend weeks chasing a woman halfway across Europe because our fathers made a deal before either of us had a say? I didn't ask for this any more than you did. Then let me go. I can't. Why not? Because it's already done, Leonardo said flatly. The contracts are signed, the families are aligned. If I walk away now, it doesn't just humiliate my father, it starts a war. And the first person who dies in that war will be you. Stephanie went very still. You're lying. I wish I was. She searched his face, looking for the crack, the tell, the proof that he was manipulating her again. She didn't find it. This is insane, she whispered. Welcome to my life. I didn't choose this. Neither did I. Then why are you going through with it? Leonardo looked at her for a long moment. At the woman who'd spent 2 weeks letting him see parts of herself she'd never shown anyone else, who'd kissed him like he was the only solid thing in a world built on quicksand, who was looking at him now like he was the enemy. Because the alternative is worse, he said quietly. Stephanie turned away, her shoulders shaking with something that might have been laughter or might have been sobs. I hate you, she said. I know. I mean it. I really, really hate you. I know. She pressed her palms against the window, her breath fogging the glass. What happens when we land? We go to my family's estate. You meet my mother. We finalize the wedding arrangements. And if I refuse, then I'll do everything in my power to keep you alive anyway. It wasn't the answer she wanted, but it was the only one he had. They didn't speak again for the rest of the flight. When the plane touched down at a private airstrip outside New York, it was past midnight. The city skyline glittered in the distance like broken glass. Stephanie descended the stairs onto the tarmac with Leonardo close behind her. A black SUV was waiting, engine running, windows tinted so dark she couldn't see inside. A man in a suit opened the rear door. Stephanie hesitated. Get in, Leonardo said. Not unkind, just tired. She got in. The drive took 40 minutes, winding out of the city and into the kind of countryside where estates had gates and driveways that went on for miles. Stephanie watched the trees blur past in the darkness, her mind numb, her body exhausted. When they finally pulled up to the house, she had to bite back a bitter laugh. It wasn't a house. It was a fortress. Stone walls, iron gates, security cameras every 20 feet. The kind of place that looked like old money from the outside and tasted like blood underneath. Leonardo's childhood home, her future prison. Welcome to the Valenti estate, Leonardo said as the car stopped in front of the main entrance. Stephanie said nothing. They walked inside together, and she was immediately struck by the sheer scale of it. Marble floors, high ceilings, chandeliers that looked like they weighed more than her entire childhood apartment. Everything polished, everything perfect, everything cold. A woman appeared at the top of the grand staircase, mid-50s, elegant, with dark hair swept into a flawless chignon and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Leonardo, she said warmly, descending the stairs with practiced grace. You're home. Hi, Ma. The woman's gaze shifted to Stephanie and her smile widened. And you must be Stephanie. I've heard so much about you. Stephanie doubted that very much. Mrs. Valenti, she said, because she didn't know what else to say. Please, call me Carmela. The older woman reached out and took Stephanie's hands in hers, her grip warm and firm. I'm so glad you're finally here. We've been waiting for this day for a very long time. The words sounded kind. They felt like a noose. I'm sure you're exhausted, Carmela continued, releasing Stephanie's hands. Leonardo, show her to her room. We'll talk more in the morning. Leonardo nodded, and Carmela disappeared down a hallway, leaving them alone in the massive foyer. This way, Leonardo said. He led her up the staircase and down a long corridor lined with family portraits, generations of Valentis staring down at her with cold, judgmental eyes. He stopped at a door near the end of the hall and pushed it open. The room inside was beautiful. King-sized bed with silk sheets, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the gardens, a private bathroom with a clawfoot tub that probably cost more than most people's cars. It looked like a dream. It felt like a cell. Your things will be brought up tomorrow, Leonardo said. If you need anything, I'm 2 doors down. Stephanie walked into the room, her arms wrapped around herself. Am I allowed to leave? The estate? No. The room? Leonardo hesitated. You're not a prisoner. That's not an answer. You can go anywhere on the property, but there are guards, and they have orders to keep me here. To keep you safe. Right, safe. Leonardo leaned against the doorframe, exhaustion written all over his face. I know this isn't what you wanted, he said quietly. You don't know anything about what I wanted. Then tell me. Stephanie turned to look at him, and for the first time since the plane, she let him see the full weight of her anger. I wanted a life that belonged to me, she said. I wanted to wake up in the morning and not feel like I was drowning. I wanted to be more than just a bargaining chip in someone else's war. And for 2 weeks in Barcelona, I actually thought I could have that. But you took it from me. You took everything. Leonardo flinched. I'm sorry. No, you're not. I am. If you were sorry, you'd let me go. I can't. Then your apology doesn't mean shit. Silence. Leonardo straightened, his hand on the door. Get some sleep, he said. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. He closed the door behind him, and Stephanie heard the soft click of a lock sliding into place. She was alone. Finally. She crossed to the window and pressed her forehead against the cool glass, looking out at the sprawling grounds below. Somewhere out there was a gate. Guards. Freedom just out of reach. And standing between her and escape was the man she'd fallen in love with under a sky full of lies. Stephanie closed her eyes. She didn't cry. She was too angry to cry. The next morning, Stephanie woke to sunlight streaming through the windows and the faint sound of voices downstairs. She'd barely slept, had spent most of the night staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment in Barcelona, trying to figure out which parts had been real and which had been strategy. She still didn't have an answer. Someone had left clothes in the closet while she slept. Designer labels, all in her size, all perfectly tailored. It should have felt like a gift. Instead, it felt like another cage being built around her, one expensive piece at a time. She pulled on jeans and a sweater and ventured downstairs. The dining room was massive, with a table long enough to seat 20 people. Carmela sat at one end, reading a newspaper and sipping espresso. Leonardo sat across from her, his laptop open, his expression unreadable. They both looked up when Stephanie entered. Good morning, Carmela said brightly. Did you sleep well? Not really. Understandable. It's a big adjustment. Stephanie poured herself coffee from the carafe on the sideboard and sat down as far from Leonardo as possible. Carmela folded her newspaper. I thought we could spend the day getting to know each other, she said. There's so much to do before the wedding. Dress fittings, venue arrangements, guest lists. It's going to be a beautiful celebration. Stephanie gripped her coffee cup so hard her knuckles went white. I haven't agreed to anything. Carmela's smile didn't falter. Of course, dear, but the agreements were made long before you arrived. I'm sure Leonardo explained. He explained plenty. Good. Carmela stood, smoothing her skirt. Then let's get started, shall we? It wasn't a question. The day passed in a blur of humiliation disguised as hospitality. Carmela dragged Stephanie through the estate like a prize show dog, introducing her to staff, showing her the ballroom where the reception would be held, pointing out family heirlooms that would someday belong to her. Every word out of the woman's mouth was polite, kind even. But beneath it, Stephanie could feel the iron grip of expectation. This wasn't a conversation. It was indoctrination. By the time they returned to the main house, Stephanie's head was pounding and her patience was gone. "I need some air," she said. "Of course," Carmela replied. "The gardens are lovely this time of year. Leonardo, why don't you show her?" Leonardo, who'd been silent most of the day, nodded. "Come on." They walked outside together, following a stone path that wound through perfectly manicured hedges and flower beds that looked like they'd been designed by someone who'd never seen an actual garden. Stephanie kept her arms crossed, her gaze fixed on the ground. "Your mother's terrifying," she said finally. "She means well." So did Mussolini. Leonardo almost smiled. "She's just excited. You're the first woman I've ever brought home. You didn't bring me. You dragged me." Semantics. Stephanie stopped walking and turned to face him. "Do you actually want this?" she asked. "Or are you just going along with it because you don't know how to say no to your family?" Leonardo looked at her for a long moment. "Does it matter?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because I need to know if you're just as trapped as I am." Something flickered across his face, something that looked almost like relief. "I've been trapped my whole life," he said quietly. "Just in a different cage." Stephanie exhaled slowly. "So we're both prisoners." "Looks like it. And you're okay with that?" "No," Leonardo said, "but I'm used to it." They stood there in the garden, two people caught in a web neither of them had spun, and for the first time since the plane, Stephanie saw him clearly. Not as the man from Barcelona, not as the heir to a criminal empire, just as someone who was tired of pretending he had control over his own life. "I don't want to hate you," she said. "Then don't. It's not that simple." "I know." A door slammed somewhere in the house, and a woman's voice rang out. Sharp, cutting, furious. "Where the hell is she?" Leonardo tensed. "That's my sister." "You have a sister?" "Unfortunately." A woman appeared on the terrace, mid-20s, tall, with dark hair pulled back in a severe ponytail and eyes that could cut glass. She stormed down the steps toward them, fury radiating off her like heat. "You must be the famous Stefani," she said, stopping a few feet away. "The girl who thinks she's too good for this family." Stephanie blinked. "Excuse me?" "Gianna," Leonardo said, his voice tight. "Not now." "Oh, I think now is perfect," Gianna shot back. She turned her glare on Stefani. "Do you have any idea how much chaos you caused by running? How many resources we wasted tracking you down? How much you embarrassed this family? I didn't ask to be part of this family, and yet here you are." "Gianna, I swear to God." "What, Leo? You're going to defend her?" Gianna laughed bitterly. "She's been here less than 24 hours, and she's already got you wrapped around her finger. Pathetic." Leonardo stepped between them, his jaw locked. "Walk away." "Or what?" "Or I'll make you." Gianna stared at him, something dangerous flickering in her eyes. Then she smiled, cold, calculating. "She's going to ruin you," she said, "and when she does, don't say I didn't warn you." She turned and walked back toward the house, leaving a trail of venom in her wake. Stephanie exhaled slowly. "She seems nice." "She's protective." "Of you or the Empire?" "Both." "Well, she's got nothing to worry about. I'm not here by choice." Leonardo looked at her, something unreadable in his expression. "She thinks you are." "Then she's an idiot." "Maybe." They walked back inside in silence. Dinner that night was a special kind of hell. The entire Valenti family gathered around the long dining table, Carmela at the head, Leonardo to her right, Gianna across from him, and Stephanie wedged between Leonardo and an uncle who smelled like cigar smoke and asked invasive questions about her plans for children. She wanted to stab someone with her fork, preferably Leonardo. "So, Stephanie," Carmela said, cutting into her salmon with surgical precision, "have you given any thought to the wedding dress?" "Not really. We have an appointment with Vera Wang next week. I think you'll love her designs." "I'm sure I will." "And the flowers. I was thinking white roses and peonies, classic, elegant." "Sounds great." Carmela smiled, oblivious to the fact that Stephanie was answering on autopilot. "I'm so glad you're being reasonable about all this," she said. "I know it's overwhelming, but once you settle in, I think you'll find that being part of this family has its advantages." "Like what?" Stephanie asked. "Armed guards, locked doors, A husband I didn't choose? The table went silent. Carmela's smile tightened. Leonardo, she said quietly, perhaps you should take Stephanie upstairs. She seems tired. I'm fine, Stephanie said. You're not. Don't tell me how I feel. Stephanie, Leonardo said, his voice low. A warning. She ignored him. You people act like this is normal, she said, her voice rising. Like forcing someone into marriage is just part of doing business. Like I should be grateful for the privilege of being sold off to the highest bidder. That's not what this is, Carmela said, her tone sharp now. Then what is it? It's survival. It's protection. It's the way our world works. Your world, not mine. It's yours now. Stephanie pushed back from the table, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. No, she said, it's not. She walked out before anyone could stop her. Leonardo found her an hour later in the library, curled up in an armchair with a book she wasn't reading. He didn't say anything, just sat down across from her and waited. Finally, Stephanie looked up. I can't do this, she said. Yes, you can. No, I really can't. Leonardo leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I know my family's a lot. I know they're pushy and controlling and completely incapable of understanding boundaries. But they're not the enemy. Then who is? Your father. Stephanie went still. What do you mean? Leonardo hesitated, like he was weighing how much to tell her. There's something you need to know, he said finally, about why this marriage was arranged in the first place. I already know. Our fathers wanted an alliance. It's more than that. Then tell me. Leonardo stood crossing to the window. His reflection stared back at him in the dark glass. Your father's been making moves, he said quietly. Dangerous ones. He's been aligning himself with families that want my father dead. Families that see the Valentis as competition. Stephanie's stomach dropped. You think he's planning something? I know he is. How? Because 3 weeks ago, one of his associates tried to put a bullet in my head. The words hung in the air like smoke. Stephanie stood slowly. You're lying. I wish I was. My father wouldn't. Your father would do anything to expand his territory, Leonardo said, turning to face her. Including using you as a distraction while he sets up an ambush. That's insane. That's the truth. Stephanie shook her head, her mind racing. If that's true, then why go through with the wedding? Why not just kill him first? Because if we move against him without proof, we start a war. And wars are expensive, bloody, bad for business. So you're using me as bait? No, Leonardo said, crossing the room until he was standing right in front of her. I'm using this marriage to keep you out of the crossfire. Stephanie looked up at him, searching his face for the lie. She didn't find one. I don't believe you. Then don't. But it doesn't change the facts. Which are, your father sold you to save himself, and the only reason you're still alive is because I said yes. The room felt too small, too hot. Stephanie backed away, her heart pounding. I need to talk to him. No, he's my father. He's a coward who uses his daughter as a human shield. You don't know that. Yes, I do. Let me talk to him. Absolutely not. It's not your decision. Leonardo grabbed her wrist. Not hard, but firm enough to stop her. You call him, and he'll know exactly where you are. He'll know you're alive and unharmed, which means his leverage is gone. And the second that happens, he'll move up his timeline. You're paranoid. I'm careful. There's a difference. Stephanie yanked her hand free. I hate this, she said, her voice breaking. I hate all of this. I know. Then let me go. I can't. Why not? Because He stopped himself. Stephanie stared at him. Because what? Leonardo's jaw worked, like he was trying to swallow words that would change everything. Because I can't watch you die, he said finally. The admission landed between them like a confession. Stephanie's breath caught. You don't even know me. I know enough. 2 weeks in Barcelona doesn't count. It counts to me. They stood there in the dim library, close enough to touch, neither of them moving. This doesn't change anything, Stephanie said. I know. I still hate you. I know that too. But when Leonardo reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, she didn't pull away. And when he leaned in, slow, careful, giving her every chance to stop him, she didn't. Their lips met in the middle, and the kiss was nothing like the ones in Barcelona. This one tasted like anger, desperation, the kind of need that came from knowing you were both drowning and the only thing keeping you afloat was the person trying to pull you under. When they finally broke apart, Stephanie was shaking. I hate you, she whispered again. I know, Leonardo said, but neither of them moved. 3 days later, Stephanie made a decision. She was going to find out the truth. About her father, about the wedding, about whether Leonardo was telling the truth or just spinning another lie to keep her compliant. And the only way to do that was to break into Leonardo's private office. She waited until the house was quiet, until Carmela had gone to bed and Gianna had disappeared into whatever hole she crawled into at night, until Leonardo was locked in his study with his laptop and his whiskey, working on something he refused to explain. Then she moved. The office was on the second floor, behind a door that was always locked. But Stephanie had learned a lot of things growing up in her father's world, and picking locks was one of them. It took her less than 2 minutes. Inside, the office was exactly what she expected. Dark wood, leather furniture, walls lined with books that probably hadn't been read in decades. And on the desk, a laptop still open, the screen glowing faintly in the darkness. Stephanie crossed to it, her heart pounding. The screen showed an email thread. She scrolled through it quickly, her eyes scanning names she recognized. Rival families, known associates, federal contacts. And then she saw it. A message from her father, sent 2 weeks ago. Her hand started shaking as she read. The girl's location confirmed. Barcelona. She'll run when she sees him. Letter. It makes the grab cleaner. Wedding proceeds as planned. Day of. We move. Below it, Leonardo's response. Understood. I'll bring her in. Stephanie's vision blurred. She scrolled further, and the thread got worse. Her father wasn't planning to kill Leonardo during the wedding. He was planning to kill them both. The marriage was bait. The alliance was fake. And the second the ceremony was over, armed men were supposed to storm the venue and execute every Valenti in the room, including Leonardo's mother, his sister, and Stephanie herself. Her father had sold her twice. Once to the Valentis, once to the men who wanted them all dead. Stephanie backed away from the desk, her stomach lurching. Behind her, the door opened. Find what you were looking for? Leonardo stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. Stephanie couldn't speak. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. I left the laptop open on purpose, he said quietly. I needed you to see it. Why? Because you wouldn't have believed me otherwise. Stephanie's legs gave out, and she sank into the chair behind her. He's going to kill me, she whispered. Not if I stop him first. How? Leonardo crouched in front of her, his hands resting on the arms of the chair, caging her in. You're going to help me, he said. Help you how? You're going to give me access to your father's network, his files, his communications, everything. I can't. Yes, you can. You know his systems better than anyone. He'll know. Not if you're careful. Stephanie shook her head, panic rising in her chest. If I do this, I'm dead. If you don't do this, we're both dead. He was right. She hated that he was right. What happens after? She asked. After what? After we stop him. After this is over. What happens to me? Leonardo's gaze softened. That's up to you. Is it? Yes. Stephanie looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the truth written all over his face. He meant it. Okay, she said finally. I'll do it. Leonardo exhaled, something like relief washing over his features. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, because Stephanie had just made a choice that would either save them both or destroy everything. And she had no idea which one it would be. Stephanie spent the next 72 hours learning how to become a traitor. Leonardo set her up in a secure room on the 3rd floor of the estate. No windows, reinforced door, enough computer equipment to run a small intelligence operation. He brought her coffee at odd hours, sandwiches she barely touched, and sat beside her in silence while she worked her way through layers of encryption her father had spent years building. She didn't speak to him unless she had to. Every keystroke felt like digging her own grave. Her father's network was vast, larger than she'd imagined, more sophisticated than anything the Valentis had suspected. Files upon files of transaction records, communications with rival families, offshore accounts tied to shell corporations that didn't exist on paper. And buried deep in the system, hidden behind passwords only she would know, was the kill order. The wedding was scheduled for Saturday, 4 days away. At precisely 2:15 in the afternoon during the reception, armed men would enter through the service entrance disguised as catering staff. They would lock down every exit, and they would execute every member of the Valenti family in attendance, including Stefan. Her father had signed her death warrant in an email sent from his personal server 3 weeks ago. She read it twice to make sure she wasn't imagining it. She wasn't. "How much longer?" Leonardo asked from the doorway. Stephanie didn't look up from the screen. "Almost done." "You said that 6 hours ago." "And I meant it 6 hours ago. Things take time." Leonardo crossed the room, leaning against the desk beside her. He smelled like whiskey and exhaustion. "You need to sleep. I need to finish this." "Stephanie, don't." He went quiet. She kept typing, her fingers flying across the keyboard, pulling files, copying directories, building a digital paper trail that would bury her father so deep he'd never see daylight again. When she finally leaned back in her chair, her eyes were burning and her hands were shaking. "It's done," she said. Leonardo straightened. "All of it?" "Everything. Transaction logs, communications, the kill order, offshore accounts. Enough to put him away for 3 lifetimes." "Can you send it?" "To who?" "Federal contacts. People outside the families." Stephanie hesitated. "If I do this, there's no going back." "I know." "He's still my father. He tried to have you killed." "I know that." "Then what's stopping you?" Stephanie looked up at him, and for the first time in days, she let him see how terrified she actually was. "Because once I hit send, I'm not his daughter anymore," she said quietly. "I'm just another person who betrayed him. And in our world, that's a death sentence." Leonardo crouched beside her chair, his green eyes locked on hers. "You were dead the second he made that deal," he said. "This is you fighting back." "It doesn't feel like fighting. It feels like surrender." "Sometimes they're the same thing." Stephanie held his gaze for a long moment. Then she turned back to the screen, pulled up the encrypted email she'd drafted to 3 separate federal contacts, attached every file she'd pulled from her father's servers, and hovered her finger over the send button. "If this goes wrong, it won't. You don't know that." "No," Leonardo admitted. "But I know you, and I know you're strong enough to survive whatever comes next." Stephanie wanted to believe him. She really did. She hit send. The email disappeared into the void, carrying with it every secret her father had spent decades protecting. And just like that, Stephanie Moretti became a ghost in her own family. The next 2 days moved in a blur. Leonardo pulled in resources from every corner of the Valenti network. Security teams, legal advisors, federal contacts who owed favors. He locked down the estate, doubled the guard rotations, and made it clear that no one got in or out without his explicit approval. Carmela didn't ask questions. She just watched Stefani with an expression that looked almost like pity. Gianna, on the other hand, made her feelings perfectly clear. "You're going to get us all killed," she said, cornering Stephanie in the hallway outside the library. Stephanie kept walking. "I'm trying to keep us alive." "By sending your father's files to the feds? Are you insane?" "Probably." Gianna grabbed her arm, spinning her around. "This isn't a joke. You just declared war on one of the most powerful men in New York. He declared war first. And now you've made it personal. Do you have any idea what he's going to do when he finds out?" "I don't care." "You should." Stephanie yanked her arm free. "Your brother asked for my help. I gave it to him. If you have a problem with that, take it up with Leonardo." "Oh, I will." Gianna stormed off, leaving Stephanie alone in the hallway with her heart racing and her hands clenched into fists. She was starting to understand why Leonardo drank so much. That night, Stephanie couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the estate settling around her, footsteps in distant hallways, the low murmur of voices from the security station downstairs, the faint hum of the HVAC system, normal sounds, safe sounds. She didn't believe them. At 3 in the morning, she gave up and went downstairs. The kitchen was empty, dark except for the glow of the under-cabinet lighting. Stephanie poured herself a glass of water and stood at the window, looking out at the gardens. Can't sleep? She spun around. Leonardo stood in the doorway, barefoot, wearing sweatpants and a t-shirt that looked like he'd pulled it on 2 seconds ago. His hair was a mess. His eyes were tired. You startled me, Stephanie said. Sorry. He crossed to the fridge, pulled out a bottle of water, and leaned against the counter beside her. They stood in silence for a while. Are you scared? Stephanie asked finally. Of what? Saturday. Leonardo took a long drink before answering. Terrified. You don't look it. I've had practice. At being terrified? At hiding it. Stephanie looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the cracks in the armor he wore so carefully, the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw stayed locked even when he wasn't speaking, the exhaustion that went deeper than lack of sleep. You don't have to do this alone, she said. Neither do you. I know. Leonardo set his water down and turned to face her fully. I need to tell you something. Stephanie's stomach tightened. What? After Saturday? If we survive this, you're free. She blinked. What are you talking about? The marriage contract. I'll void it. You can leave. Go anywhere you want. I'll make sure you have enough money to disappear completely. Stephanie stared at him. You're serious? Yes. Why? Because you were right, Leonardo said quietly. Back in Barcelona. You deserve a life that belongs to you. Not your father. Not my family. You. Something cracked open in Stefani's chest. And what about you? What about me? What do you get out of this? Leonardo smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. The satisfaction of knowing I didn't turn into my father. That's not enough. It'll have to be. Stephanie took a step closer, close enough to see the faint scar above his left eyebrow, the shadow of stubble along his jaw, the way his eyes darkened when he looked at her. What if I don't want to leave? She asked. Leonardo went very still. Don't say that. Why not? Because it'll make this harder. Make what harder? Letting you go. Stephanie reached up and touched his face, her palm against his cheek. Then don't let me go. Leonardo closed his eyes like her touch physically hurt. Stephanie, I mean it. After Saturday, if we're both still alive, don't let me go. You don't know what you're asking. Yes, I do. He opened his eyes, and the look in them was so raw it made her chest ache. You're going to regret this. Maybe. But right now, I don't care. Leonardo's hand came up to cover hers, his fingers threading through hers. You should care. Too late. He leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. She didn't. When their lips met, it felt like falling, like drowning, like every terrible decision she'd ever made leading her to this exact moment. And she didn't want to stop. They kissed in the dark kitchen until Stephanie's back was pressed against the counter, and Leonardo's hands were in her hair, and neither of them could breathe properly. When they finally broke apart, Leonardo rested his forehead against hers. This is a bad idea, he whispered. I know. We should stop. We should. But neither of them moved. Saturday arrived like a death sentence. Stephanie woke at dawn to the sound of people moving through the estate. Security teams doing final sweeps, caterers setting up in the ballroom, florists arranging centerpieces that probably cost more than most people's rent. The wedding was happening whether she wanted it or not. Carmela came to her room at 8 with a team of stylists who spent the next 4 hours turning her into someone she didn't recognize. They did her makeup, styled her hair, laced her into a dress that felt like armor disguised as silk. When they finally stepped back to admire their work, Stephanie looked in the mirror and saw a stranger, a bride, a target, a woman about to walk into a massacre. You look beautiful, Carmela said softly. Stephanie said nothing. Downstairs, the estate had been transformed into something out of a magazine spread. White flowers everywhere. String quartet playing in the corner. Guests in designer suits and dresses, smiling and drinking champagne like this was just another society wedding. None of them knew what was coming. Leonardo found her in the bridal suite 20 minutes before the ceremony. He looked devastatingly perfect in his tuxedo. Black on black, tailored within an inch of its life, his dark hair slicked back in a way that made him look older. Dangerous. Like the man he was always meant to become. "You ready?" he asked. "No." "Me neither." He crossed the room and took her hands in his. "Security's in place," he said quietly. "Every entrance is covered. The feds are on standby. If anything goes wrong, I know. Stay close to me. Don't leave my sight." "Leonardo." "I mean it, Stephanie. Whatever happens, you stay with me." She nodded. He lifted her hands to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. "For what it's worth," he said, "I'm glad it's you." Stephanie's throat tightened. "Even though I'm a disaster?" "Especially because you're a disaster." She almost smiled. Almost. The ceremony started at 2. Stephanie walked down the aisle on the arm of Leonardo's uncle, her own father notably absent, his seat conspicuously empty in the front row. Guests whispered behind their hands, but no one said anything outright. Leonardo waited for her at the altar, his expression carefully neutral. When she reached him, he took her hand and she felt the slight tremor in his fingers. He was terrified. So was she. The officiant began speaking, but Stephanie didn't hear a word. Her eyes scanned the room, looking for threats, for movement, for anything out of place. Everything looked normal. Too normal. And then, at exactly 2:13, the lights went out. The ballroom plunged into darkness. Someone screamed. Leonardo's hand tightened on hers. "Stay calm," he said, his voice carrying over the rising panic. "Everyone, stay calm." But it was too late. The doors burst open and men in tactical gear poured into the room. At least a dozen of them, moving with military precision, weapons raised. Not catering staff. Armed mercenaries. Guests scattered, screaming, scrambling for exits that were already blocked. Leonardo pulled Stephanie behind him, his body a shield. "Get down!" he ordered. But Stephanie couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but stand there frozen as the room descended into chaos. One of the men stepped forward, pulling off his helmet. Stephanie's blood turned to ice. It was her father. Domenico Moretti stood in the center of the ballroom, a gun in his hand, his expression cold and eerily calm. "Hello, sweetheart," he said. Stephanie's legs nearly gave out. "Dad, did you really think I wouldn't find out?" he asked, walking toward her slowly. "Did you think you could leak my files to the feds and I'd just let it slide?" Leonardo stepped forward. "This is between you and me, Domenico." "No," her father said, his eyes still locked on Stephanie. "This is between me and my daughter." He raised the gun, pointed it directly at her. "I gave you everything," he said. "A name, a legacy, a future. And you threw it away to play hero with the Valentis." "You tried to have me killed," Stephanie said, her voice shaking. "I tried to teach you a lesson. There's a difference." "You're insane." "I'm practical." Her father's finger moved to the trigger. Leonardo moved. He shoved Stephanie sideways just as the gun fired, and the bullet that should have hit her chest slammed into his shoulder instead. He went down hard. Stephanie screamed. Chaos erupted. Security teams swarmed in from every direction. Federal agents burst through the blocked exits, weapons drawn, shouting orders. Guests dove under tables, scrambling for cover. And in the middle of it all, Leonardo lay on the floor bleeding, his hand pressed to his shoulder, his face pale. Stephanie dropped to her knees beside him. "No, no, no. I'm okay," he said through gritted teeth. "You're not. I've had worse. Leonardo, get out of here. I'm not leaving you." "Stephanie!" Another gunshot rang out, and one of the mercenaries dropped. Federal agents were everywhere now, shouting, dragging people out of the ballroom, wrestling armed men to the ground. Stephanie's father was still standing, his gun still raised, his eyes locked on her. "You chose them over me," he said. "You didn't give me a choice. I gave you everything. You gave me a cage." Her father's expression twisted into something ugly. "Then you can die in one." He aimed the gun at her again, This time, no one was close enough to stop him. Stephanie closed her eyes. The gunshot never came. Instead, there was a dull thud, and when she opened her eyes, her father was on the ground with 3 federal agents on top of him, his gun skittering across the floor. He was done. Finished. Arrested. Stephanie couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but kneel beside Leonardo while medics rushed in and people shouted and the world spun out of control around her. "Stay with me," she whispered, her hands pressed to his wound, trying to stop the bleeding. "I'm not going anywhere," Leonardo said, his voice weak but steady. "You better not." "Stephanie, don't you dare die on me, Leonardo Valenti. Not after everything." He smiled, actually smiled, despite the blood and the chaos and the fact that he'd just taken a bullet meant for her. "Wouldn't dream of it." The medics pushed her aside, working fast, stabilizing him, getting him onto a stretcher. Stephanie watched them carry him out, her hands covered in his blood, her wedding dress ruined, her entire world tilting on its axis. And in that moment, standing in the wreckage of what was supposed to be her wedding, she realized something that terrified her more than any gun or threat or marriage contract ever had. She was in love with him. Completely. Irrevocably. Catastrophically in love. And she had no idea if he was going to survive. The hospital waiting room smelled like antiseptic and bad coffee. Stephanie sat in a plastic chair, still wearing her blood-stained wedding dress, her hands shaking in her lap. Carmela sat beside her, silent and pale. Gianna paced near the windows, arms crossed, radiating barely controlled fury. They'd been waiting for 3 hours. No news, no updates. Just the endless tick of the clock on the wall and the distant sound of monitors beeping in rooms they couldn't see. Finally, a doctor appeared. Stephanie shot to her feet. "How is he?" "Stable," the doctor said. "The bullet missed major arteries. He's going to need physical therapy, but he'll recover." The relief hit her so hard she nearly collapsed. "Can I see him?" "He's sedated, but you can sit with him if you'd like." Stephanie didn't wait for permission. She followed the doctor down a sterile hallway to a private room where Leonardo lay unconscious, his shoulder bandaged, an IV in his arm, monitors tracking his vitals. He looked smaller somehow, vulnerable in a way she'd never seen him. She pulled a chair up beside the bed and took his hand. "You're an idiot," she whispered. "You know that, right? Taking a bullet for me? What were you thinking?" Leonardo didn't answer. She sat there in the quiet, listening to the steady beep of his heart monitor, and let herself cry for the first time since Barcelona. Not from fear, not from anger, from something bigger, something that felt too enormous to name. She cried until there was nothing left. And then she leaned forward, pressed a kiss to his forehead, and whispered the truth she'd been too scared to say out loud. "I love you." Leonardo's fingers twitched slightly in hers, but he didn't wake up. The next 24 hours were a nightmare of federal interrogations, legal proceedings, and damage control. Stephanie gave her statement to 3 different agents, walked them through every file she'd leaked, every piece of evidence she'd uncovered. Her father was being held without bail on charges that would keep him locked up for the rest of his life. The Moretti Empire was finished, and so was she. At least, that's what it felt like. Carmela found her in the hospital cafeteria the next morning, nursing a cup of coffee she hadn't touched. "How are you holding up?" the older woman asked, sitting down across from her. "I've been better." "I can imagine." They sat in silence for a moment. "Leonardo's awake," Carmela said finally. Stephanie looked up sharply. "Is he okay?" "He's asking for you." She was out of her chair before Carmela finished the sentence. Leonardo was sitting up when she walked in, his shoulder heavily bandaged, his face drawn but alert. He looked like hell. He'd never looked better. "Hey," he said. "Hey." Stephanie crossed to the bed, unsure whether to hug him or hit him. She settled for sitting down in the chair beside him. "You scared the hell out of me," she said. "Sorry. Don't do it again?" "I'll try." They looked at each other for a long moment. "Thank you," Stephanie said finally, "for taking that bullet. You would have done the same." "Maybe, but I'm still mad at you for it." Leonardo smiled, really smiled, and it transformed his entire face. "Fair enough." Stephanie reached out and took his hand, threading her fingers through his. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now?" Leonardo shifted, wincing slightly. Now we figure out what comes next. Together? He looked at her, his green eyes steady. If you want. I do. Even after everything? Especially after everything. Leonardo exhaled slowly, something like relief washing over his features. Then stay, he said quietly. Not because you have to, because you want to. Stephanie leaned forward, careful of his shoulder, and kissed him gently. I'm not going anywhere, she whispered against his lips. Promise? Promise. And for the first time since she'd stepped off that plane in Barcelona, Stefani Moretti stopped running. Not because she was trapped, because she'd finally found something worth staying for. But outside the hospital room, in a hallway Stephanie couldn't see, 2 federal agents were having a conversation that would change everything. We've got a problem, the first one said. What kind of problem? The files she leaked? They're incomplete. What do you mean, incomplete? I mean, someone scrubbed them before they hit our servers. Whole sections are missing. Transaction records, communications, offshore accounts. The second agent swore quietly. Who had access? Only 2 people, Stephanie Moretti and Leonardo Valenti. The silence that followed was heavy with implication. You think he's been playing her this whole time? I think we need to find out. Because if Leonardo had been the one to scrub those files, it meant one of 2 things. Either he was protecting his family's secrets, or he'd been working with Stefani's father all along. And Stephanie, lying in a hospital bed holding the hand of the man she loved, had no idea that the worst betrayal was still coming. Stephanie didn't find out about the missing files until 2 days after Leonardo was released from the hospital. She was in the estate library trying to make sense of the legal paperwork the federal prosecutors had sent over, when Agent Maria Torres walked in unannounced with a briefcase and an expression that made Stephanie's stomach drop. We need to talk, Torres said. Stephanie closed the folder in front of her. About what? About the files you sent us? What about them? Torres set her briefcase on the table and pulled out a laptop. We've been going through everything you leaked from your father's servers. Transaction records, communications, offshore accounts. It's a solid case, enough to put him away for multiple lifetimes. Good. Except there's a problem. Stephanie's chest tightened. What kind of problem? Torres turned the laptop toward her and the screen showed a directory listing. Dozens of files, each one marked with a red warning symbol. These files were scrubbed, Torres said. Someone went through and deleted entire sections before they reached our servers. Communications between your father and his associates. Transaction records linking specific shipments to specific buyers. Account numbers that would have connected the dots between at least 6 different criminal organizations. Stephanie stared at the screen, her mind racing. That's impossible. I sent everything. You sent what you had access to, but someone with admin privileges went in after you and wiped the most damaging evidence. Who? Torres leaned back against the table, arms crossed. That's what I was hoping you could tell me. I don't know. I pulled everything my father had. I didn't hold anything back. I believe you. Then who? Stephanie stopped. The answer hit her like a fist to the gut. Leonardo. He'd been in that room with her, had access to the same systems, had watched her work for 3 days straight, mapping out her father's entire operation. He could have copied everything, could have scrubbed the files before they went out, could have been protecting his own family's interests the entire time. No, Stephanie said, shaking her head. No, he wouldn't. Wouldn't what? Leonardo wouldn't sabotage the case. He wanted my father gone as much as I did. Did he? Yes. Torres pulled out a second file, this one physical, and dropped it on the table. Then explain this. Stephanie opened it. Inside were surveillance photos, grainy, taken from a distance, but clear enough to recognize the faces. Leonardo meeting with a man Stephanie didn't know in a parking garage. Leonardo shaking hands with someone who looked like federal law enforcement. Leonardo standing outside a building Stephanie recognized as one of her father's old safe houses. All of them dated from before Barcelona, before he'd ever told her his real name. What is this? Stephanie asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Your fiancé has been on our radar for years, Torres said. We've been building a case against the Valenti organization for the better part of a decade, and every time we get close, evidence disappears. Witnesses recant. Files get corrupted. You think Leonardo's been covering for his family? I think Leonardo Valenti is very good at making problems disappear. Stephanie's hands were shaking. Why are you telling me this? Because I need to know whose side you're on. I'm not on anyone's side. I'm trying to survive. Then help us. Help you how? Torres closed the laptop and looked at Stephanie directly. Get us proof that Leonardo scrubbed those files. Real proof. Something we can use in court. You want me to spy on him? I want you to tell us the truth about what he's been doing. And if I refuse? Then we'll assume you're complicit. And when this case falls apart because half the evidence is missing, you'll go down with your father. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Stephanie stood slowly, her legs unsteady. I need time. You don't have time. We're filing formal charges in 48 hours. If you can't give us something by then, we'll have no choice but to include you in the indictment. Torres packed up her briefcase and headed for the door. For what it's worth, she said, pausing in the doorway, I hope I'm wrong about him. Then she was gone. Stephanie stood alone in the library, staring at the surveillance photos spread across the table, and felt the ground shift beneath her feet all over again. She found Leonardo in his study an hour later. He was at his desk, laptop open, a glass of whiskey within reach. His shoulder was still bandaged, and he moved carefully, but he looked stronger than he had in the hospital. He looked up when she walked in. Hey, you okay? Stephanie closed the door behind her. We need to talk. Something flickered across his face. Concern, maybe, or something darker. About what? She crossed to the desk and dropped the surveillance photos in front of him. About these. Leonardo looked down at the photos, his expression unreadable. Where did you get these? Federal agent. She came to see me today. What did she want? She wanted to know why half the files I sent them are missing. Leonardo went very still. What are you talking about? Someone scrubbed them, Leonardo. Someone with admin access went through and deleted the most damaging evidence against my father before it reached the feds. And she thinks I did it. Did you? The question landed between them like a grenade. Leonardo leaned back in his chair, his jaw tight. You're actually asking me that. Answer the question. No, I didn't scrub the files. Then who did? I don't know. Bullshit. Leonardo stood, wincing slightly as the movement pulled at his shoulder. I don't know who scrubbed the files, Stephanie, but it wasn't me. Prove it. How? Show me your access logs, your system records, anything that proves you didn't touch those files after I sent them. I don't have to prove anything to you. Yes, you do. Why? Because some federal agent showed you a few photos and now you think I'm the enemy? Because I need to know if I've been sleeping next to a liar for the past 2 weeks. The words came out sharper than she intended, but she didn't take them back. Leonardo's expression went cold. You already know the answer to that, he said quietly. I lied to you in Barcelona. I lied about my name, my intentions, everything. So yeah, Stephanie, you've been sleeping next to a liar. The only question is whether you can live with that. Don't turn this around on me. I'm not. I'm asking you a direct question. Do you trust me or not? Stephanie wanted to say yes. Wanted to believe that the man who'd taken a bullet for her, who'd held her while she cried, who'd promised to let her go if she wanted to leave, wouldn't betray her like this. But the photos were right there on the desk, and she'd spent her entire life learning that trust was a luxury people like her couldn't afford. I don't know, she said finally. Leonardo's face went blank. Then we have a problem. Leonardo. Get out. What? I said get out. If you can't trust me, there's no point in having this conversation. You can't just kick me out of your study. It's my house. I can do whatever I want. Stephanie stared at him, anger rising hot and fast in her chest. You're unbelievable. So are you. I came in here asking for the truth, and I gave it to you. You just don't want to believe it. Because I have no reason to believe it. You have every reason, Leonardo said, his voice rising now. I took a bullet for you. I went up against your father to keep you safe. I've done everything in my power to protect you, and you're standing here accusing me of sabotaging the one thing that could actually end this nightmare. So forgive me if I'm a little offended that you think I'd throw all of that away to protect a man I've been trying to bury for years. Then show me proof. I don't have proof. I have my word. And apparently, that's not good enough for you. They stood on opposite sides of the desk, breathing hard, staring each other down like enemies. "The feds want me to spy on you," Stephanie said finally. "They want proof that you scrubbed those files. And if I don't give them something in 48 hours, they're going to charge me as an accomplice." Leonardo's expression didn't change. "So what are you going to do?" "I don't know." "Yes, you do." "No, I really don't." "You're going to do whatever it takes to save yourself. That's what you've always done." The accusation stung worse than a slap. "That's not fair." "Isn't it? You ran from your father, you ran from me, and now you're going to run from this too." "I'm not running. I'm trying to figure out who I can trust." "And you've decided it's not me." "I didn't say that." "You didn't have to." Leonardo picked up his whiskey and drained it in one swallow. "Do what you have to do, Stephanie, but don't expect me to make it easy for you." He walked past her toward the door. "Where are you going?" "Anywhere you're not." The door slammed behind him, rattling the bookshelves. Stephanie stood alone in the study, her hands shaking, her heart pounding, and realized she'd just made everything so much worse. That night, Stephanie did something she swore she'd never do. She broke into Leonardo's private server. It took her 4 hours and 3 different encryption bypasses, but she finally got in. And what she found made her blood run cold. The files were there. All of them. Every single piece of evidence she'd sent to the feds, transaction records, communications, offshore accounts, sitting in a secure directory on Leonardo's personal server, dated 2 days before she'd hit send. He'd copied everything, and then he'd scrubbed the versions that went to federal agents. The proof was right there in the access logs. Leonardo's username, his timestamps, his digital fingerprints all over the deletion records. Stephanie sat back in her chair, staring at the screen, and felt something inside her break. He'd lied. Again. He'd looked her in the eye and told her he didn't scrub the files, and he'd been lying the entire time. She should have known better. Should have trusted her instincts instead of her heart. Should have remembered that men like Leonardo Valenti didn't protect people out of kindness. They protected their own interests. Always. Stephanie copied the access logs onto a flash drive, logged out of the server, and sat in the dark trying to figure out what the hell she was supposed to do now. She could give the evidence to Torres. Watch Leonardo get arrested. Let the feds tear apart the Valenti empire the same way they were tearing apart her father's. It would be justice. It would be smart. It would also destroy the man she loved. Because despite everything, despite the lies, the betrayal, the surveillance photos, the missing files, she still loved him. And that was the worst part. Stephanie pressed her palms against her eyes and tried not to scream. She found Leonardo in the gym at 3 a.m. He was on the treadmill running despite the fact that his shoulder had to be killing him, sweat soaking through his shirt, his face tight with pain, and something that looked a lot like rage. Stephanie stood in the doorway and watched him push himself harder, faster, like he was trying to outrun something that lived inside his own head. Finally, she spoke. "You lied to me." Leonardo didn't slow down. "Yeah, I did." "You scrubbed the files." "Yeah." "Why?" He slammed the emergency stop button and the treadmill lurched to a halt. He braced his hands on the rails, breathing hard. "Because half of those files implicated my family," he said. "Not just my father, my uncles, my cousins. People who had nothing to do with your father's operation, but would have gone down anyway because their names were in the wrong emails." "So you protected them?" "Yes. Even though it meant sabotaging the case against my father." Leonardo stepped off the treadmill and grabbed a towel, wiping the sweat from his face. "Your father's going to prison either way," he said. "The evidence you sent is enough to bury him. The stuff I scrubbed? That was just collateral damage." "Collateral damage," Stephanie repeated. "That's what you're calling it." "What would you call it?" "I'd call it exactly what the feds think it is. You protecting your empire at the expense of justice." "Justice," Leonardo said, and he laughed. Bitter, exhausted. "There's no such thing as justice in our world, Stephanie. There's just survival, and I chose to protect my family. Same as you would have done if the positions were reversed." "You don't know that." "Yes, I do." Stephanie pulled the flash drive out of her pocket and held it up. "I have proof, access logs, timestamps, everything the feds need to charge you." Leonardo looked at the drive, then back at her. "So give it to them." "What?" You want me to pay for what I did? Fine. Give them the proof. Let them arrest me. I won't fight it. Stephanie stared at him. You're serious? Completely. Why? Because I'm tired, Stephanie. I'm tired of lying. I'm tired of protecting an empire built on blood and violence. I'm tired of pretending I'm anything other than what I am. And what's that? A criminal. Just like my father. Just like yours. The words hung in the air between them. Stephanie took a step closer. You took a bullet for me. So? So that doesn't sound like something a criminal would do. You'd be surprised. Leonardo... Stop, he said, his voice rough. Don't try to make me into something I'm not. I scrubbed those files to protect my family. I lied to you because I didn't want to drag you into it, and I'd do it all over again if it meant keeping the people I care about safe. Even if it meant losing me? Leonardo's jaw tightened. I already lost you the second I got on that plane in Barcelona. That's not true. Isn't it? You've been looking for an excuse to leave since the moment we landed in New York, and now you have one, so take it. Give the feds their proof. Walk away. Be free. Stephanie looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the truth written all over his face. He meant it. He was giving her an out, a clean break, everything she'd wanted since the beginning. And she realized with sudden, devastating clarity that she didn't want it anymore. I'm not giving them the drive, she said. Leonardo blinked. What? I said I'm not giving them the drive. Stephanie, I'm going to delete it, and then I'm going to tell Torres that I couldn't find anything. You can't do that. Yes, I can. They'll charge you as an accomplice. Then they'll charge me. You'll go to prison. Maybe. Or maybe I'll get a good lawyer and fight it. Either way, I'm not giving them proof that you scrubbed those files. Leonardo stared at her like she'd lost her mind. Why? Because you were right, Stefani said. I would have done the same thing if it meant protecting the people I care about. And I can't punish you for making the same choice I would have made. You're insane, probably. They're going to destroy you. Let them try. Leonardo crossed the space between them in 2 strides and grabbed her face in his hands. You don't have to do this. I know. Then why are you? Stephanie looked up at him, her heart pounding, and said the truth she'd been too scared to admit. Because I love you, you idiot, and I'm done running. Leonardo kissed her, hard, desperate, like she was the only thing keeping him tethered to the ground. And when they finally broke apart, both of them breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. I love you too, he whispered. I know. We're both idiots. Probably. This is going to blow up in our faces. Definitely. Leonardo smiled, really smiled, and it was the most beautiful thing Stephanie had ever seen. Then let's go down together. Deal. Stephanie deleted the files that night. Every access log, every timestamp, every piece of evidence that could have connected Leonardo to the scrubbed files. She burned the flash drive in the estate's fireplace and watched it melt into nothing. And when Agent Torres showed up 2 days later demanding proof, Stephanie looked her in the eye and lied. I couldn't find anything. Torres didn't believe her. You're making a mistake. It's mine to make. They're going to charge you. Then they'll charge me. Stefani, I'm done talking. If you want to arrest me, arrest me. Otherwise, get out of my house. Torres left. And 3 hours later, federal agents showed up with a warrant for Stephanie's arrest. They charged her with obstruction of justice, conspiracy to commit fraud, and accessory after the fact to organized crime. Leonardo watched from the front steps as they put her in handcuffs and loaded her into the back of an unmarked car. His face was blank, unreadable, but his hands were clenched into fists so tight his knuckles had gone white. As the car pulled away, Stephanie looked back through the rear window and saw him standing there, alone on the steps of the estate that had become both their prison and their home. And she realized with perfect, terrifying clarity that she had just sacrificed everything to protect him. Her freedom, her future, her life. And she didn't regret it for a second. The holding cell was cold. Stephanie sat on a metal bench, still in handcuffs, staring at the concrete floor and trying not to think about how badly she'd just screwed up her entire existence. They'd taken her phone, her jewelry, everything except the clothes on her back. She had no idea how long she'd been sitting there. An hour. Maybe 2. Finally, a guard appeared. "You've got a visitor." Stephanie looked up. "Who?" The guard didn't answer, just unlocked the cell and led her down a hallway to a small interrogation room. Leonardo was waiting inside. He looked exhausted, furious, and something else Stephanie couldn't quite name. The guard left them alone. "What are you doing here?" Stephanie asked. Leonardo didn't answer immediately, just stood there staring at her like he was trying to memorize her face. Finally, he spoke. "I'm getting you out." "How?" "I'm giving them what they want." Stephanie's stomach dropped. "No." "Yes." "Leonardo, you can't." "I already did," he said quietly. "I gave them access to the files I scrubbed. All of them. Told them I did it to protect my family. Told them you had nothing to do with it. They'll arrest you." "They already did." Stephanie's breath caught. "What?" "I posted bail an hour ago, and I made a deal. Full cooperation in exchange for immunity for you." "You can't do that." "I already did." "Leonardo, yo." "You were willing to go to prison for me," he said, stepping closer. "The least I can do is make sure you don't have to." Stephanie's eyes burned. "You're going to lose everything." "I don't care." "Your family, will survive. They always do." "This is insane." "Welcome to my life." Stephanie looked at him, at the man who'd lied to her, betrayed her, protected her, loved her, and was now sacrificing his entire empire to set her free. "I don't deserve this," she whispered. "Yes," Leonardo said quietly. "You do." He reached out and took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "When you get out of here, I want you to leave," he said. "What?" "Go to Europe, South America, anywhere that's not New York. Start over. Build the life you always wanted." "Without you?" "Yes." "No." "Stephanie." I said no. She pulled him close, ignoring the handcuffs, ignoring the fact that they were standing in a federal holding facility, ignoring everything except the fact that she was done letting other people decide her future. "I'm not leaving you," she said. "You have to. I don't have to do anything. They're going to tear my family apart. It's going to get ugly. Then I'll be there when it does." "Why?" "Because you're mine," Stephanie said fiercely, "and I don't abandon what's mine." Leonardo's expression cracked, and for the first time since she'd met him, Stephanie saw him cry. Not much, just enough to know he'd been holding it in for too long. She kissed him gently, tasting salt and desperation and something that felt almost like hope. "We're going to survive this," she whispered. "How do you know?" "Because we've survived everything else." Leonardo smiled through the tears. "You're insane." "So are you." "Yeah, I am." They stood there holding each other in a room built for confessions and lies, and made the only promise that mattered. They'd face whatever came next together. No more running, no more lies, just two people who'd been broken by the same world, choosing to rebuild something new from the wreckage. And outside the interrogation room, Agent Torres watched through the one-way glass and realized she'd just witnessed something she'd never seen before in 20 years of federal service. Two criminals choosing love over survival. It would have been beautiful if it wasn't so goddamn stupid. But as she watched Leonardo Valenti hold Stephanie Moretti like she was the only thing keeping him alive, Torres made a decision. She was going to give them one chance, one opportunity to prove they could actually walk away from the empires that had shaped them. And if they failed, she'd bury them both. Stephanie walked out of federal custody 6 hours later with Leonardo beside her and Agent Torres watching from the doorway like a hawk, deciding whether to let its prey go. The deal was simple. Leonardo would testify against every remaining associate in both the Moretti and Valenti organizations who'd participated in criminal activity. He'd hand over financial records, communication logs, and enough evidence to dismantle what was left of two empires that had ruled New York's underworld for 3 generations. In exchange, Stephanie walked free. No charges, no trial, no prison time. And Leonardo got 5 years probation, federal oversight of all his business dealings, and a target on his back the size of Manhattan. It wasn't mercy, it was survival dressed up as justice. They drove back to the estate in silence, Leonardo's hands tight on the steering wheel, Stephanie staring out the window at a city that suddenly felt like it belonged to someone else. "You okay?" Leonardo asked finally. "No." Me neither. They pulled through the gates, and the mansion loomed ahead of them like a monument to everything they were about to lose. Carmela was waiting on the front steps. She didn't say anything when they got out of the car, just looked at her son with an expression that landed somewhere between heartbreak and fury. "Is it done?" she asked quietly. "Yes." "All of it?" "Yes." Carmela's jaw tightened, but she didn't cry. Women like her didn't cry in front of witnesses. "Your father would be ashamed." Leonardo flinched like she'd slapped him. "My father built an empire on blood and terror. If he's ashamed, good. You've destroyed everything he worked for. He destroyed it himself the second he decided violence was the only language worth speaking." Carmela looked past him to Stefani, and the contempt in her eyes was sharp enough to cut. "This is your fault." Stephanie met her gaze without flinching. "Yeah, it is. You should have stayed in Switzerland." "Probably." "Get out of my house." "Carmela," Leonardo started. "I'm not talking to you," his mother snapped. "I'm talking to the woman who walked into our lives and set everything on fire. Get out, both of you." Leonardo's expression went cold. "This is my house." "Not anymore. The feds are seizing it, along with the accounts, the properties, the businesses, everything. It's all gone, Leonardo, because of her." "Because of me," Leonardo corrected. "I made the deal. I handed over the evidence. Stephanie had nothing to do with it. She had everything to do with it. She saved my life. She ruined it." The words hung in the air like poison. Stephanie stepped forward, her voice steady despite the way her heart was hammering in her chest. "You're right," she said. "I did ruin it. I came here running from my own family's violence, and I brought that violence with me. I put Leonardo in an impossible position, and he made a choice that cost him everything. So if you want someone to blame, blame me. But don't stand there and pretend your empire was worth saving. It wasn't. It was built on the same blood and terror that destroyed my family. And maybe burning it down was the best thing that could have happened to both of you." Carmela stared at her, fury radiating off her in waves. "You have no idea what you've done." "Yes," Stephanie said quietly. "I do." She turned to Leonardo. "I'll wait in the car." She walked away before he could respond. Leonardo watched her go, then turned back to his mother. "I'm sorry," he said. Carmela's expression didn't soften. "No, you're not." "You're right. I'm not." "Then don't insult me by pretending." Leonardo exhaled slowly. "I know you think I betrayed you. Betrayed Dad's legacy. Betrayed everything this family stands for. But I didn't. I chose something different, something better. And if that makes me a traitor in your eyes, I can live with that. Can you live with knowing your sister will never speak to you again? That your uncles want you dead? That your name means nothing in this city anymore? Yes? You're a fool." "Maybe." Carmela looked at him for a long moment, and something in her expression cracked just enough for him to see the woman underneath the armor. "I hope she's worth it," she said quietly. "She is." "Then go." Leonardo hesitated, like he was waiting for her to say something else, to tell him she understood, to give him permission to walk away. She didn't. He turned and walked to the car. Stephanie was sitting in the passenger seat, her arms wrapped around herself, staring straight ahead. Leonardo slid into the driver's seat and started the engine. "Where do we go now?" she asked. "I don't know. We can't stay here." "I know. Do you have anywhere else?" Leonardo pulled out of the driveway, the estate shrinking in the rearview mirror. "There's an apartment in Brooklyn. Small. Nothing fancy. I bought it years ago under a shell company. The feds don't know about it." "How long can we stay there?" "As long as we need to." Stephanie looked over at him, and for the first time since the holding cell, she saw the weight of what he'd just lost settling on his shoulders. "I'm sorry," she said. "Don't be." "Your mother." "My mother made her choice. I made mine." "You chose me." "Yes." "Why?" Leonardo glanced at her, and the look in his eyes made her chest ache. "Because you're the first person who ever made me want to be something other than what I was born to be." Stephanie reached over and took his hand. "We're going to be okay," she said. "How do you know?" "Because we don't have any other choice." Leonardo smiled grimly. "That's not exactly reassuring." "It's the truth." They drove through the city in silence, watching the skyline blur past, and both of them knew they were leaving behind more than just buildings and money. They were leaving behind entire identities. The Brooklyn apartment was exactly what Leonardo had promised. Small, unremarkable, tucked into a neighborhood where no one asked questions and everyone minded their own business. One bedroom, a kitchen barely big enough to turn around in, windows that overlooked a bodega and a laundromat. It was perfect. Stephanie dropped her bag on the floor and looked around, trying to imagine building a life in a space this small after spending weeks in a mansion with more rooms than she could count. "It's not much," Leonardo said. "It's enough." "You sure?" "Yeah." She crossed to the window and looked out at the street below. People walked past carrying groceries, pushing strollers, living lives that had nothing to do with crime families or federal investigations or blood-soaked legacies. Normal lives. The kind of life she'd spent years trying to build in Switzerland before everything fell apart. "What do we do now?" she asked. Leonardo came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "We figure it out." "How?" "One day at a time." Stephanie leaned back against him, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat against her spine. "I don't know how to do normal," she admitted. "Me neither. What if we're terrible at it? Then we'll be terrible together." Stephanie turned in his arms, looking up at him. "You really think we can make this work?" "I think we don't have a choice but to try." "That's still not reassuring." Leonardo smiled, really smiled, and kissed her forehead. "Get used to it." The first week was the hardest. Leonardo spent hours on the phone with federal prosecutors, walking them through files, answering questions, providing testimony that would put away dozens of people he'd known his entire life. Stephanie watched him age 5 years and 7 days. She tried to help, tried to keep the apartment clean, tried to cook meals that didn't come from takeout containers, tried to pretend she knew what the hell she was doing. She didn't. On the 8th day, she broke down. It happened while she was trying to make coffee, and the cheap machine refused to work, and suddenly she was crying over a countertop, shoulders shaking, gasping for air like she'd been holding her breath for weeks. Leonardo found her like that. He didn't say anything, just pulled her into his arms and held her while she fell apart. "I'm sorry," she gasped between sobs. "I'm sorry. I don't know why." "You don't have to apologize. I can't stop thinking about what we lost. What you lost. Your family, your home, everything. I didn't lose everything." "Yes, you did." "No," Leonardo said firmly. "I lost things. Property, money, a legacy built on violence, but I didn't lose what matters." "What matters?" He pulled back just enough to look at her. "You." Stephanie's breath caught. "Leonardo, I mean it. You matter more than any empire, more than any legacy, more than anything my father or your father ever built. So if I had to choose between keeping you or keeping everything else, I'd choose you every single time." Stephanie kissed him then, tasting salt and desperation, and the kind of love that only made sense when everything else had been stripped away. When they finally pulled apart, both of them breathing hard, Leonardo rested his forehead against hers. "We're going to survive this," he whispered. "Promise?" "Promise." And for the first time since they'd left the estate, Stephanie believed him. 3 months later, Stephanie got a job. It was nothing glamorous, junior developer at a tech startup in Manhattan, the kind of place where everyone wore hoodies and worked 12-hour days fueled by cold brew and ambition. She loved it. For the first time in her life, she was earning her own money, building her own reputation, succeeding on her own terms instead of riding the coattails of a family name that meant violence and power. She came home exhausted every night, and Leonardo was always waiting. He'd started consulting, using his business degree and his understanding of organizational structure to help legitimate companies optimize their operations. It was boring, safe. Nothing like the empire he'd been raised to inherit. He loved it, too. They built a life in that tiny Brooklyn apartment that had nothing to do with crime or blood or legacy. They argued about whose turn it was to do dishes. They stayed up too late watching terrible movies. They learned how to be normal. It wasn't perfect. Leonardo still had nightmares about the wedding, the gunshot, the blood, the moment he'd thought Stephanie was going to die right in front of him. Stephanie still flinched every time she saw a black SUV with tinted windows. But they were healing, slowly, together. 6 months after the trial ended, Gianna showed up at their door. Stephanie answered the knock, and her stomach dropped when she saw Leonardo's sister standing in the hallway, looking thinner, harder, older than she had at the estate. "Can I come in?" Gianna asked. Stefani stepped aside. Leonardo emerged from the bedroom, and the look on his face when he saw his sister was complicated. Relief mixed with wariness, mixed with something that looked almost like hope. "Gianna." "Leo." They stood on opposite sides of the small living room, neither of them moving.
"How did you find us?" Leonardo asked finally. "I'm still a Valenti. We have resources. Not as many as we used to."
Gianna's mouth twitched. "No, not as many." Silence settled over them like dust.
"Why are you here?" Stephanie asked.
Gianna looked at her, and for the first time there was no contempt in her expression, just exhaustion.
"To apologize."
Leonardo blinked. "What?" "I was wrong," Gianna said. "About you. About this." She gestured vaguely at the apartment. "I thought you were throwing away everything that mattered. But I've spent the last 6 months watching what's left of our family tear itself apart, and I realized something." "What?" "You were the only one brave enough to walk away." Leonardo's throat worked. "Gianna, Mom's drinking herself to death. Our uncles are in prison or dead. The businesses are gone. The estate's been seized. Everything Dad built is dust. And you know what the worst part is?" "What?" "You were right. It was never worth saving." Gianna's voice cracked on the last word, and Stephanie saw the tears she was trying so hard to hold back. Leonardo crossed the room and pulled his sister into his arms. She broke down against his chest, sobbing like a child, and Stephanie turned away to give them privacy. When Gianna finally pulled herself together, her eyes were red, but her voice was steady. "I'm leaving New York," she said, "going to California, starting over, and I wanted to tell you in person before I disappeared." "You don't have to disappear," Leonardo said. "Yes, I do. The Valenti name is poison here. I need to be someone else." "I understand." Gianna looked at Stefani. "Take care of him," she said. "He's an idiot, but he's my idiot." Stephanie smiled despite herself. "I will. And for what it's worth, I'm sorry. For how I treated you. You didn't deserve it." "It's okay." "No, it's not. But thank you for saying that." Gianna hugged her brother one more time, nodded at Stephanie, and left. After she was gone, Leonardo stood in the middle of the living room looking lost. "You okay?" Stephanie asked. "I don't know." "Come here." She pulled him down onto the couch and wrapped herself around him. "She's going to be okay," Stephanie said. "How do you know?" "Because she's a Valenti, and Valentis survive." Leonardo huffed something that might have been a laugh. "Not all of us. The ones that matter do." He kissed the top of her head. "I love you." "I know." "Say it back." "I love you too." They sat there holding each other while the city hummed outside their window, and both of them knew they'd just survived another piece of the past letting go. A year after the wedding that never happened, Leonardo asked Stephanie to marry him, for real this time, not because of contracts or alliances or empires, because he wanted to. They were in Central Park on a Sunday afternoon, sitting on a bench near the lake, watching people jog past and dogs chase frisbees and the world spin on without them. Leonardo pulled a small box out of his pocket and set it on the bench between them. Stephanie looked at it, then at him. "What's this?" "Open it." Inside was a ring, simple, elegant, nothing like the ostentatious diamond he'd given her before. "Leonardo, I'm not asking because I have to," he said. "I'm asking because I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Not in a mansion, not with guards or empires or legacies, just us. In that tiny apartment with the broken coffee maker and the neighbor who plays bass at 3 a.m. That's the life I want. And I want it with you." Stephanie stared at the ring, her eyes burning. "You're serious?" "Completely." "What if I say no?" "Then I'll ask again tomorrow." "And if I say no then I'll ask the day after that." Stephanie looked up at him, and the love in his eyes was so overwhelming it hurt to look at. "You're insane." "So are you. We're terrible at being normal. The worst. We're going to fight about stupid things."
Probably. And we're going to have bad days. Definitely. And we're both broken in ways that might never heal. I know. Stephanie picked up the ring and turned it over in her fingers. Ask me properly, she said. Leonardo slid off the bench and onto one knee right there in Central Park, ignoring the joggers and the tourists and the entire world around them. Stefani Moretti, he said. Will you marry me? She looked at him, at the man who'd lied to her, protected her, nearly died for her, and loved her through every terrible decision they'd both made. Yes, she said. Leonardo slipped the ring onto her finger and kissed her so hard she forgot how to breathe. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were crying and laughing and clinging to each other like they'd just survived a war, which, in a way, they had. They got married 3 months later in a courthouse in Brooklyn with 2 witnesses they'd pulled off the street and a judge who looked bored until Stephanie kissed Leonardo like her life depended on it, and the old man actually smiled. No flowers, no guests, no empire watching, just 2 people choosing each other in a world that had tried everything to keep them apart. Afterwards, they went to a diner and ate pancakes and drank terrible coffee and talked about where they wanted to be in 5 years. I want to build something, Leonardo said. Something legitimate. Something that actually helps people instead of hurting them. Like what? I don't know yet, but I'll figure it out. What about you? He asked. What do you want? Stephanie thought about it. About the girl who'd run from Switzerland to Barcelona to New York, trying to escape a future that had been decided for her before she was born. About the woman she'd become. Scarred, stronger, still terrified, but learning how to stand her ground. I want to stop being afraid, she said finally. Of what? Everything. My father, your family, the past. I want to wake up in the morning and not feel like I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop. Leonardo reached across the table and took her hand. We'll get there. You promise? I promise. And for the first time in her entire life, Stephanie believed that promises could actually be kept. 2 years after the trial, Stephanie got a call from Agent Torres. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Stephanie Moretti? It's Valenti now. Right, sorry. How are you? Fine. Why are you calling? Torres hesitated. I thought you should know. Your father died this morning. The words landed with less impact than Stephanie expected. How? Heart attack. Quick. He didn't suffer. Stephanie sat down on the couch, the phone pressed to her ear, waiting for something to hit her. Grief, anger, relief. She felt nothing. Are you okay? Torres asked. I don't know. Do you want me to arrange for you to... No. You sure? Yeah, he made his choices. I made mine. There's nothing left to say. Torres was quiet for a moment. For what it's worth, I think you made the right call. Leaving that world behind, building something new. Yeah? Yeah. You and Leonardo, you're proof that people can change if they want it badly enough. That's rare. Thanks. Take care of yourself, Stephanie. You too. Stephanie hung up and sat there in the quiet of their apartment, staring at nothing. Leonardo came home an hour later and found her still sitting there. What's wrong? My father's dead. Leonardo set down his bag and sat beside her. How do you feel? Empty. That's normal. Is it? I don't know, probably. Stephanie leaned against him, and he wrapped an arm around her shoulders. I thought I'd feel something, she said. Relief, closure, something, but I just feel nothing. Maybe that's okay. Is it? Yeah. He doesn't get to take up space in your head anymore. Even grief is space. And you don't owe him that. Stephanie thought about that. About the man who'd sold her to save himself, who'd tried to have her killed at her own wedding, who'd spent his entire life building an empire on other people's suffering. You're right, she said finally. I don't owe him anything. No, you don't. They sat there together while the sun set outside their window, and Stephanie let go of the last piece of her father's hold on her life. 3 years after the wedding that became a massacre, Stephanie and Leonardo bought a house. Not a mansion, just a house. 3 bedrooms in Queens with a backyard big enough for a dog and a kitchen that actually had counter space.
They moved in on a Saturday with help from exactly 2 friends, people they'd met through work who didn't know anything about their past and didn't ask. That night, sitting on the floor of their empty living room surrounded by boxes, Leonardo pulled Stephanie close. "We did it," he said. "Did what?" "Built something that's actually ours." Stephanie looked around at the bare walls and the scuffed floors and the kitchen that needed new appliances. It was perfect. "Yeah," she said. "We did." "What do you want to do first?" "Get a dog." Leonardo laughed. "Seriously?" "Completely. A big one. Something that sheds everywhere and tracks mud through the house." "You hate messes." "I'll learn to love them." They got the dog 2 weeks later, a golden retriever they named Max, who did exactly what Stephanie predicted and destroyed every pristine surface in the house within a month. They didn't care. 6 months after that, Stephanie came home from work and found Leonardo in the kitchen staring at his laptop with an expression she couldn't quite read. "What's wrong?" "Nothing, I think. Maybe." "That's not an answer." Leonardo turned the laptop toward her. On the screen was a business proposal for a nonprofit foundation focused on helping young people escape organized crime. Counseling, job training, legal assistance, housing, everything Leonardo wished someone had offered him when he was young enough to think he had choices. "What do you think?" he asked. Stephanie read through the proposal, her heart climbing into her throat. "I think it's perfect." "Really? Really? When do we start?" "We? You think I'm letting you do this alone?" Leonardo smiled, the kind of smile that transformed his entire face and reminded Stephanie why she'd fallen in love with him in the first place. "I was hoping you'd say that." They launched the foundation 8 months later with funding from Leonardo's legitimate consulting business and a small grant from a federal program for former criminals trying to make amends. It wasn't much, but it was real. And within the first year, they'd helped 17 kids get out of situations that would have destroyed them. 17 lives that didn't have to end the way theirs almost had. On the foundation's 1-year anniversary, Stephanie stood in their office, a cramped space above a pizzeria in Brooklyn, and looked at the wall of photos. Kids who'd graduated high school, kids who'd gotten into college, kids who'd escaped abusive homes and violent families and futures that had been decided for them before they were old enough to fight back. Leonardo came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. "You okay?" "Yeah, just thinking." "About what?" "About how far we've come." Leonardo rested his chin on her shoulder. "Pretty far." "You ever regret it? Giving up everything you were supposed to inherit?" "Not once." "Not even a little?" "Not even a little." Stephanie turned in his arms, looking up at him. "I'm pregnant." Leonardo went completely still. "What?" "I'm pregnant. About 8 weeks." His eyes went wide, then soft, then filled with something that looked a lot like awe. "Are you sure?" "Took 3 tests, all positive." "When did you—" "This morning." Leonardo pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. "We're having a baby." "Yeah, we are." "I don't know how to be a father." "I don't know how to be a mother. We're going to be terrible at this." "Probably." Leonardo pulled back just enough to kiss her. "I love you. I love you too. We're going to figure it out." "I know." And they did. The baby came 7 months later, a girl with dark hair and green eyes who screamed loud enough to wake the entire hospital. They named her Elena, after the fake identity Stephanie had used in Barcelona, the name that represented freedom. Leonardo held his daughter for the first time in a hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and new beginnings, and cried like he'd been holding it in his entire life. "She's perfect," he whispered. "She is." "What if I'm not good at this?" "Then we'll figure it out together." "Promise?" "Promise." Elena grew up in Queens in a house with a backyard and a dog, and parents who loved her so fiercely it hurt. She didn't know about empires, didn't know about violence, didn't know that her grandfather had tried to have her mother killed, or that her father had once been heir to a criminal organization that had ruled New York for generations. All she knew was that her parents loved each other, that they worked hard, that they helped people, and that every night before bed, Her father would kiss her forehead and tell her she could be anything she wanted, not because of her name, because of who she chose to become. 5 years after Elena was born, Stephanie stood in the kitchen of their house in Queens making breakfast, while Leonardo chased their daughter around the living room and Max barked happily at nothing. The coffee maker, a new one, because they'd finally replaced the broken one from Brooklyn, beeped softly. The sun streamed through the windows. The world outside kept spinning. And Stephanie realized something that made her chest ache in the best possible way. She'd stopped running, not because she'd been caught, not because she'd been forced, but because she'd finally found a place worth staying, a life worth building, a family worth fighting for. Leonardo appeared in the doorway with Elena on his shoulders, both of them laughing, and looked at Stephanie with an expression that still made her heart skip after all these years. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "How lucky we are. We almost died multiple times. I know. We lost everything. I know that too. And you still think we're lucky?" Stephanie crossed to him and kissed him gently. "Yeah," she said. "I do. Because luck wasn't about what you were born with. It was about what you chose to keep." And Stephanie Moretti, now Stephanie Valenti, had chosen love over legacy, freedom over fear, and a future built on her own terms instead of someone else's blueprint. She'd chosen Leonardo. She'd chosen Elena. She'd chosen the life they'd built together in the wreckage of two empires that had tried everything to destroy them. And that choice, that simple, terrifying, beautiful choice, had saved them both. Later that night, after Elena was asleep and the house was quiet, Stephanie and Leonardo sat on their back porch watching the stars come out over Queens. "You ever think about Barcelona?" Leonardo asked. "Sometimes. Do you regret it, meeting me there?" Stephanie thought about the girl she'd been in Barcelona, terrified, running, convinced that freedom meant being alone. And the woman she'd become, scarred but stronger, loved but not owned, free because she'd chosen to stay instead of choosing to run. "No," she said finally, "I don't regret it. Even though I lied to you? Even though you lied to me. Why?" Stephanie took his hand and laced their fingers together. "Because you were the first person who ever made me believe I could be more than just my father's daughter. You saw me when I was still invisible to myself, and you loved me even when I didn't know how to love you back." Leonardo kissed her knuckles gently. "You saved me too, you know." "How?" "You gave me a reason to walk away from everything I was supposed to be, a reason to choose something better. And without that, I'd still be my father's son, building an empire on blood and pretending I didn't hate every second of it." They sat there in the dark, holding hands, watching their daughter's nightlight flicker in the upstairs window. Two people who'd survived the worst their families could throw at them. Two people who'd chosen each other when the entire world said they shouldn't. Two people who'd built something real out of the ashes of everything they'd lost. "I love you," Stephanie said. "I love you too." "Forever?" "Forever." And in that moment, sitting on a back porch in Queens with a life that belonged entirely to them, Stephanie finally understood what freedom actually meant. It wasn't running. It wasn't hiding. It wasn't even escaping. It was choosing who you wanted to be and building a life around that choice, no matter how many times the world tried to tear it down. It was finding someone who saw you, really saw you, and choosing to let them stay. It was waking up every morning in a house you'd earned, with a family you'd chosen, and knowing that every scar you carried had been worth it to get here. Freedom was the moment you stopped fighting the past and started building the future. And Stephanie Valenti, former runaway, former prisoner, former daughter of an empire built on violence, was finally, completely, irrevocably free. The end.